Imagine living in a world where the most terrifying monsters don't lurk in the shadows, but walk among us, hiding behind friendly smiles and normal lives. These aren't just horror stories, they are chilling realities. Some serial killers were never caught, some hid in plain sight, and some left behind crimes so brutal they still haunt investigators today. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into 3 terrifying true stories of serial killers whose crimes shook the world. These are not just tales of murder, but nightmares that became real. Let's get into it. Story 1, The Butcher of Kingsbury Run by William Harrington. Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s was a city of industry, progress, and opportunity. But beneath the bustling streets, an insidious terror lurked. A killer so gruesome, so methodical, that even the most seasoned detectives were left horrified. He was called the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, and his crimes were unlike anything the city had ever seen. It began in 1934, when the first 2 bodies surfaced near the shores of Lake Erie. They were headless, mutilated beyond recognition, with precise cuts that suggested someone with surgical knowledge. The police were baffled. These weren't simple murders. They were dissections. The victims had been completely drained of blood, their heads missing, as if the killer had deliberately erased their identities. Without fingerprints or dental records, there was no way to identify them. They became known only as the Lady of the Lake and Victim Zero. For nearly 2 years, Cleveland remained quiet. The horror of the lakefront bodies faded from public memory until 1936, when another headless body was found in Kingsbury Run, a bleak stretch of land known for its shanty towns and transient population. This time, the killer had taken things even further. The victim's skin was chemically treated, giving it a strange, leathery texture. It was clear the murderer was experimenting, perfecting his craft. Then the bodies kept coming. Over the next 2 years, at least 12 more victims were discovered. Some were dumped in shallow ravines, others left in open fields. Many were dismembered so thoroughly that only torsos remained. The killer had a pattern. He targeted the forgotten, drifters, the homeless, people no one would miss. Some were never even identified. The press ran wild with speculation, and soon Cleveland was in the grip of full-blown panic. The police department was under intense pressure to solve the case, but the killer left no evidence, no witnesses, no apparent motive, just a growing number of butchered bodies. With public outcry at its peak, Eliot Ness, the famous lawman who took down Al Capone, was called in to put an end to the madness. Ness's first move was a massive raid on Kingsbury Run. Hundreds of people were arrested and interrogated. The shanty towns were burned to the ground in a desperate attempt to drive the killer out of hiding. But despite the brutal crackdown, the murders continued. It was clear the killer was one step ahead, and he wasn't about to stop. One suspect stood out, a man named Dr. Francis Sweeney. A skilled surgeon, Sweeney had a history of mental instability and alcohol abuse. He had been trained in combat surgery during World War I, where he had extensive experience amputating limbs under battlefield conditions. He was also known for his violent outbursts and erratic behavior. Ness personally had Sweeney subjected to a polygraph test twice. Both times he failed spectacularly. The interrogators were convinced they had their man, but there was one problem. Sweeney had political connections. His cousin was a powerful congressman who ensured that Sweeney was never charged. Instead, he was quietly committed to a mental institution, and then the murders stopped. For years after, Ness would receive taunting letters, supposedly from the butcher himself, mocking him for never making an arrest. Some were signed with just a single letter, F. Many believed this was Sweeney, reaching out from inside the asylum. He remained institutionalized until his death in 1964, and no more Kingsbury Run murders were reported. But not everyone is convinced that the butcher was truly gone. Some crime historians believe the murders didn't stop. They simply moved elsewhere. There were similar torso killings in Pennsylvania and New York in the following years, but the connections were never confirmed. Did the butcher have an apprentice, or did he keep killing under a different identity, knowing full well that he had gotten away with it? To this day, the case remains one of the most horrifying unsolved mysteries in American history. Story 2. The Classifieds Killer by Rebecca Aldridge. In the early 2000s, the internet was still evolving, but one thing had already taken hold: online classifieds. People used sites like Craigslist to buy and sell items, find roommates, or seek jobs. It was convenient, simple, and anonymous. But for one predator, it was the perfect hunting ground. It started with a string of missing persons cases across multiple states. The victims had one thing in common. They had all posted ads online, looking for work, furniture, or ride shares, but none of them ever came home. One of the first cases to grab police attention was Mark Calloway, a 24-year-old college student in Columbus, Ohio. He had posted an ad offering moving services. His roommate said he left one evening to meet a client. He never returned. His phone was last traced to an abandoned warehouse, but when police arrived, he was gone. Then came Stephanie Myers, a single mother from Indiana looking for a used crib. She arranged to meet the seller in a parking lot. That night, her sister tried calling her, but her phone was turned off. A week later, her car was found abandoned miles away, her purse still inside. By the time police realized the disappearances were linked, it was too late. The classifieds killer had already claimed at least 5 more victims across the Midwest. Every time, he used a different fake name and email address. Sometimes he posed as a buyer, sometimes as a seller, but the outcome was always the same. Then came Jenna Holloway, a 26-year-old woman from Kentucky. She listed her old couch for sale, and someone responded immediately, saying he'd pick it up that evening. She told her friend she'd be back in an hour, but she never returned. 2 days later, hikers found her body deep in the woods, her hands bound, her mouth covered with duct tape. She had been strangled. Nearby, police found a discarded prepaid phone, used only once, to contact Jenna. The public was terrified. News stations warned people about meeting strangers for online deals. Police urged everyone to only meet in public places, but the killer adapted. He picked locations without security cameras, empty houses for rent, secluded parks, industrial areas. Then, in 2008, authorities caught a break. A young woman named Melissa Carter arranged to meet a seller for a used laptop, but something felt off. The man gave her vague directions, leading her behind an abandoned shopping center. She brought her brother along, just in case. When they arrived, a man was waiting in his car, but as soon as he saw Melissa wasn't alone, he sped off. Her brother had written down the license plate number, and police traced it to Daryl Hemsworth, a 42-year-old electrician from Dayton, Ohio. When they searched his house, they found driver's licenses, purses, and personal items from multiple victims. In his garage, investigators discovered a hidden room with chains, restraints, and bloodstains on the floor. During interrogation, Hemsworth refused to talk, but the evidence was overwhelming. DNA from 4 missing women was found in his basement. He was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life without parole. But here's the chilling part. When detectives analyzed his online activity, they found hundreds of messages from fake accounts luring new victims. Some of these messages had been sent just days before his arrest. If Melissa hadn't trusted her instincts, she might have been next. Even now, authorities believe there are more victims, people who were never found, and some fear he wasn't the only one. So next time you arrange to meet a stranger from the internet, ask yourself, who's really on the other side of that screen? Because the classifieds killer may be gone, but his methods still live on. Story 3. The Collector by Henry Grayson. In 1992, in the quiet town of Cedar Falls, Montana, families felt safe enough to leave their doors unlocked, and kids played outside until dusk. But that year, everything changed. A serial killer was hunting in their midst, one who would come to be known as the Collector. The first to vanish was Tommy Welch, a 9-year-old boy who had been riding his bike home from a friend's house. His bike was later found in a ditch near a wooded trail, but Tommy was nowhere to be seen. A few months later, Emily Dawson, a 16-year-old high school student, disappeared while walking home from her part-time job. Her mother recalled hearing soft knocking at the front door that night, but when she opened it, no one was there. Emily never came home. Police had no leads, no suspects, and no witnesses. The town was on edge. Parents escorted their children everywhere, and businesses closed early. But the disappearances didn't stop. Then came Greg and Linda Peters, a young married couple. They were last seen leaving a diner after a late-night dinner. Their car was later found abandoned on a back road, doors wide open, engine still running. It was as if they had been plucked from the earth without a trace. Investigators finally noticed something strange. Each victim had received a small, unmarked package a few days before they vanished. The contents varied: a music box, an old key, a tiny porcelain doll. At first, police dismissed them as coincidences, but when the pattern became undeniable, they gave the sender a name: the Collector. The case took a terrifying turn when a single mother named Karen Wallace came forward. She had found a small wooden box on her doorstep one morning. Inside was a child's silver locket, engraved with the letter T. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Her son's name was Tyler. Karen immediately called the police, who urged her to leave town, but she refused. That night, she sat awake, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting. Around 3 a.m., she heard scraping sounds at her back door, followed by a soft knock. When she peeked through the blinds, she saw a figure standing in the shadows, holding something in their hand. She didn't hesitate. She called 911, whispering frantically into the phone. The figure vanished into the darkness before officers arrived, but the police found something disturbing on her porch: a stuffed rabbit, eerily similar to one her son had when he was a baby. The media exploded with the story, and the Collector's hunting ground was exposed. But despite the newfound attention, the killer vanished just as mysteriously as they had appeared. The packages stopped arriving, the disappearances came to a halt, and for a while the town breathed again. Years later, a storage unit in a neighboring town was auctioned off after its owner stopped making payments. Inside, the buyer found dozens of wooden crates, each labeled with a name and a date. The police were called immediately. What they found inside still haunts them to this day. Each crate contained personal belongings: watches, jewelry, shoes, toys, belonging to the victims. Some items dated back decades, suggesting the Collector had been active far longer than anyone realized. But the most horrifying discovery was a locked iron chest. When authorities pried it open, they found stacks of old photographs, images of the victims, some taken before they disappeared, others long after. The Collector was never caught. Some believe he died, others think he simply moved elsewhere, continuing his sick obsession in another town. What's most chilling, though, is the final crate found in that unit. Unlike the others, it had no name, just a date that hadn't arrived yet: a future victim. Even now, there are unsolved disappearances that match his signature, and the thought lingers: what if the Collector is still out there, waiting for his next prized possession? Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.